We begin this morning with a question. Are we protected well enough from future storms like the one that devastated our region just over 4 years ago, Superstorm Sandy? And how often can we expect to see destructive storms like that? TV 1055's Elise Finch has the findings from the latest study, and these findings are raising some alarm bells.
From the Jersey Shore to Connecticut, few coastal locations in the tri-state area escaped the floodwaters of Superstorm Sandy. New York City was no exception.
It was absolutely horrifying. We had no power. We basically had to evacuate. So it felt, having, not to be dramatic, but having lived through September 11th, being down here again during something traumatic like that was just really scary.
A team of researchers developed a computer model to predict the likelihood of more Sandy-type flood events in New York City. Their findings are alarming.
Events such as Hurricane Sandy, which currently occur approximately every 400 years, the frequency that those events will occur may be as much as once every 20 years.
Dr. Benjamin Horton is a professor at Rutgers University and one of the researchers who conducted the study. He says the primary reason for the dramatic increase is rising sea levels.
Sea levels will rise in the 21st century because we're increasing our atmospheric temperatures, which are causing our oceans to expand and our ice sheets to melt. Quite simply, if you increase atmospheric air temperatures, you increase ocean temperatures. Oceans are the heat source for hurricanes, so a warmer ocean means more intense hurricanes and also a potential increase in their frequency.
Those findings are true for New York City and the entire tri-state area.
I had no idea that we could be facing this again, and I hope we don't.
I think the coast we're in trouble if that's what they're speaking of.
Researchers hope their findings will move people to action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to both plan and build better coastal protection structures. Elise Finch, TV 1055.
And this new study found that intense storms and flooding could increase anywhere from 3 to 17 times their current frequency, of course, depending on just how much those ocean temperatures rise over the next few decades, the great unknown. And it's what's prompting our next guest's appearance. He's Robert Kennedy. He's the mayor of the hard-hit South Shore Long Island community, the village of Freeport. Well, welcome, Mayor.
Morning. Glad to be here.
Before we talk about the solutions to this, how hard hit was the village of Freeport, and where does it stand right now?
Freeport was devastated. They literally had 3,500 homes flooded under 5 to 6 feet of salt water. All the business district down Nautical Mile completely flooded, buildings burnt to the ground. They were devastated. We had over 1,500 tons of debris just moved out of there the following day. All the pubs, substations, the power plant, power systems were down. The village of Freeport has its own power plant also. We provide power to the northeast United States. So all the distribution piping substations down the 100-year flood zone were submerged underwater. It was devastated.
And the recovery goes on as we speak.
Yes.
As we say, these projections of ocean rise and more storms, they've led you to champion sea gates for the South Shore of Long Island. Who thought we'd hear that in our lifetime? But explain why.
The truth of the matter is they're raising homes now. Maybe 1% of the homes are being raised in Nassau County. But if you look to prevent the damages from occurring from a storm, the best way to do it is prevent the water from coming in. The water came in through Jones Inlet and Debs Inlet that flooded Nassau County and specifically Freeport. If you were to block the water off with these gates, these ocean barrier gates, you could protect the entire Nassau County.
Well, we have some graphics that were provided by your office. You want to take a look right here. This one shows, I think, the gates in Holland in the Netherlands. Is this the kind of seawall you're talking about?
Absolutely. A gate similar to this. And there's new gates that have been installed subsequent to these. You have them in Stamford, Connecticut. It costs $14 million. You have in Bedford, Massachusetts. These gates were installed. They did the barrier gates to protect. And they've said that they've saved 3 times the cost of the gates.
$14 million doesn't sound like a ridiculous amount of money. When people would have thought about this, you would have thought that they would be much more expensive, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the sea gates you're talking about in Connecticut, are they anywhere near the size of the one we just looked at?
Yes. Yes, really? They are. I mean, when we're talking about in Freeport or Jones Beach or Debs Inlet, it's basically the same size as Stamford, Connecticut, or Bedford. It may be more expensive. They were built back in the 60s, so even triple the price on each one.
So it's gone up enormously since then. Since think of anything that would have cost in the 60s, a stamp or anything like that. But we also have a couple of graphics. This is what you're lobbying for. They show the locations of where you think sea gates, if they ever get built on Long Island South Shore, should go. Tell us what you're talking about. Where are we looking at, and why there?
That picture you're looking at is the entire Nassau County, and there's 2 inlets, which is Debs Inlet, which is Reynolds Channel on the left side, and Jones Inlet on the right side. If you were to protect, and this is where the doors were open that flooded from Superstorm Sandy, if you were to prevent that water from flowing in those two inlets and build that barrier island, which they're doing anyway, rebuild the barrier island, put 2 gates in, you could close them 2 hours before high tide, open them 2 hours after high tide, and you could eliminate flooding.
So it wouldn't be just for like huge storms?
No, you could. All your nuisance flooding could be addressed with this also.
Because the South Shore of Long Island has long been plagued by that every time there's a full moon and high tide, right?
Well, also you have a problem now. The homes have devalued because people don't want to move into the area with a possibility of flooding. Insurance rates have gone so high.
Well, is this a pipe dream? I think most people would have thought it was, because you talked about a $14 million price tag in the 60s. What's the price tag now?
I'm guesstimating probably about $250 million.
Well, look at that. That's a big chunk of money.
It's a big chunk, but
where's that going to come from? Who's going to pay for that?
It's nothing compared to what the cost was to FEMA and the federal government to rebuild and to raise these houses in New York, what you're doing now.
Well, you know, part of it is to persuade people that it's money well spent. You've got so many different groups vying for money still, and that pool is starting to shrink down so much. Where does the governor's office stand on this? Because I think that's number one where you got to convince the governor to go along with something like this, right?
There's 2 methods, I think, to secure payments for this. One, I'd like to reach out to all the insurance companies. They're going to save hundreds of millions of dollars from preventing these floods.
Yeah, they got hammered by that.
They would surely want to invest some money into this. The second thing is we've spoken to Senator Schumer's office. He's secured a $3 million grant to do a back bay study now to see what the results would be by installing these type of barriers, these flood barriers. And the state has agreed to pay $1 million. The local government, which is Nassau County, has paid $450,000, and the feds were paying the $1.5.
So, you know, several $1 million set aside for. How do you study something like that? What do? They just go out and look at how the tides go up and down, or they look at best locations?
I will be involved as they start it. This contract was just approved about 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, and I'd like to be involved on a daily basis and see what exactly is involved. They want to see if this can affect the wildlife and the flow of water into the villages and out of the villages.
Now, we have a Long Island. That's why they call it Long Island. When you have a huge ocean storm surge coming in, how would the gates in a couple of places prevent the ocean still from overtopping that?
Long Island may be long, 90 miles, but it's small compared to the Atlantic Ocean. So the amount of water you'd be restricting coming into Nassau County is a drop in the bucket.
So it really kind of just diverts it elsewhere? Does this cause problems for people who are not in the path of the sea gates, like somewhere else, south, north, or whatever?
That's what this feasibility study is going to determine. But they've used them, like I say, up in Connecticut. They've been successful there. They've used them in Massachusetts. They use them in Europe. It's proven successful. It's worked. They've had no problems with it since.
So you're going to mount a campaign for this? Or?
Absolutely. I'm going to keep on pounding drums on this and moving this forward as quickly as possible.
Well, what do you think? Here we are 4 years, a couple weeks later after Superstorm Sandy. The recovery's still ongoing, maybe halfway there is what most people seem to think. Are we prepared if another big storm hits?
If we have another big storm, it's going to be devastating to Long Island. What's going to happen is the people who live on the South Shore are going to move off the South Shore. People aren't going to buy here anymore. When they don't buy here anymore, the people in the central Long Island, North Shore of Long Island, are going to have to pay the taxes for those people moving out.
Well, there you hear it. The assessment from Mayor Robert Kennedy, Village of Freeport, big advocate of sea gates, and thanks for sharing your vision on sea walls, sea gates, whatever you like to call them. Still can't believe we're talking about it, but it is a sober reality. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And when we return,